Hello, good morning and welcome to the Sunday Supplement. With Neil Ashton on international duty, I'm looking forward to dipping into the world of back-page leads, exclusives and finding out the story behind the stories. Hopefully, helping me make my debut are three solid citizens of the Fourth Estate. Oliver Holt, Chief Sports Writer at the Mail on Sunday. Simon Mullock, the Chief Football Writer at the Sunday Mirror. And Jack Pitt-Brooke, Football Writer at the Independent. And don't forget, you can tweet the show. This is your chance to question the very men who ask the questions. Now, I believe it's tradition to go through the papers now, so I'll make a start. And it's England absolutely everywhere. And you've got to say, not a lot of positivity. This is the Times. Russian roulette, referring to the fact that Gareth Southgate may play three at the back tonight. Then on to the Express. You've done nothing yet. Again, fairly damning. Familiar theme through this. This is the Observer. Southgate. England have no big players. Then to domestic matters. We've seen this one before as well. Conte set to go at the end of the season. That's the Express. While the People are saying, is it KO time for Ronald Koeman? Gentlemen, a lot to get through, but I have to say I've had a rather underwhelming welcome to this programme. As usual, the producer tweeted who's on. The immediate response was, another clueless fool who knows nothing about football has never kicked a ball. It's a fairly old line, but how do you respond to that?
Well, I'm not going to say it's fair enough, but, I mean, people are entitled to say what they want. It doesn't particularly bother me. They can think I'm a clueless fool if they want. I mean, judge us all by what we write and what we say. It's a free country. People can say what they want.
But I think the point they're trying to make is where is the credibility? And I've had it said to me as well, you've never played the game, so how can you offer opinions on tactics and football?
I think just because you played the game doesn't mean you don't have an understanding of the game, and I think most football supporters have got that same understanding of the game.
Just because you played the game doesn't, for instance, in your job, doesn't mean you can't ask, because you haven't played the game doesn't mean you can't ask the right questions. And conversely, somebody who has played the game doesn't mean they will ask the right questions. It doesn't make them journalists. You know, I think sometimes that's what people don't understand. We're not ex-footballers, we're journalists. Mm-hmm. We're not trying to be ex-footballers. And just because you haven't played doesn't mean you can't understand, or perhaps more pertinently, that you can't report and you can't observe, which is what we do. We report and we observe. We're not pretending to be ex-footballers.
I mean, I was quite relieved they didn't say in the tweet that I've never picked up a pen or bashed a keyboard, so yeah. I know I'm on sticky ground here. But do you get it thrown at you much, the credibility question?
Of course, all of the time, particularly on social media. But, you know, like Ollie says, we're not trying to pretend that we're ex-footballers, ex-professional footballers. And sometimes you see footballers on TV and, you know, you realise that they're not trained journalists. Yeah, I suppose it's a valid criticism, and it's very difficult to answer, to be honest. But like I say, everybody's got an opinion about the game. Most people have got a different opinion about the game. Some people will agree, some people won't. That's just a fact of life and a fact of the job.
I don't think any of us would claim that we could bring the insights that, say, Jamie Carragher can bring off the back of his career in the game. I think ultimately our job is more about asking the right questions, getting the right information, presenting the right information in such a way as to bring some insights to our readers and viewers without pretending that we can understand every kind of precise detail of what's going on the pitch.
But by the same token, there'll be a lot of managers looking at the likes of Jamie Carragher and similar pundits saying, well, you've never managed a team, what do you know about tactics? Well, so is it the same argument?
Well, I think it is the same argument. I mean, people said and do say now about Gary Neville because Gary had his go at Valencia and it didn't work out. You know, so Gary has had a taste of that, and people saying, well, how can you criticise a manager because it didn't work for you when you were a manager? I don't think that's valid, and I think Gary's dealt with that very well. It doesn't. It is the same thing. It doesn't really work. It doesn't mean that he is not an excellent pundit who can analyse things and make points that make you think deeply about the game. So it doesn't affect my view of him as a pundit.
If you heard me play the guitar, you'd realise that I'm not a musician, but I can appreciate good music, and I've got an opinion on what good music is, and it's pretty much the same pretty much the same in football.
Should have brought it with you.
I think ultimately this kind of this defensiveness is not very. I mean, it's not a very helpful thing in the sense that you wouldn't want to say you never played the game, so you can't criticise players. You never managed, so you can't criticise managers. Like if any of us said you've never been a journalist, so you can't criticise our journalism, it would not be a good look, I don't think, and it's also just a way of kind of batting off valid criticism. So I think it's something we should try and stay away from as far as possible.
What is the central role, if you like, for you boys? It's changed so much, as it has for all of us in the media. And we're all, and I never say press, we're all part of the media. What is the role now? It's changed from just match reports, hasn't it? Yeah,
but I think it's different things, and we all do different things in different ways. I mean, we all probably have our own, it sounds very grandiose, we all have our own philosophies probably of what we want to do and what we want to achieve. I like to try and, I suppose if I'm reporting on something, I like to try and take the reader and make the reader feel as though they're there and they've been at that game or that event and see a little bit behind the scenes of what it was like to be at that event. But I think our jobs are changing enormously because with the advent of social media, in particular, the days when you could just write a straight report of a match are gone, really, because our readers will have seen the match, they'll have digested everything on social media quite often by the time our reports, certainly in the newspaper or online even, appear. And I mean, that's so... I think
is it harder for that reason? Is it harder?
The analysis, I think analysis and comment are coming more and more to the fore because of that. Yeah, and it is an ever-changing, it's a landscape that's changing incredibly fast.
I mean, Ollie's right. I mean, he's got a different kind of role, for example, than what I would have. And Jack pretty much the same in terms of Ollie's encouraged to give an opinion. That's, people buy his newspaper because they like to read Oliver Holt. In terms of me, I keep my job pretty simple, really. I ask a question and then a report on what man says, and then right around that. So, like I say, different journalists will have different roles. But at the end of the day, you've got to get some of your opinion in there, otherwise it just becomes staid and boring.
Is there not a line you can cross, but sometimes when you start to question a manager's tactics and then advise him on what tactics he should be deploying, is that a step too far?
I think so, yeah. This is a debate that some of us had about Carlo Ancelotti over the last few weeks on social media. Obviously, he lost his job at Bayern Munich, and that was a big story. And my colleague Miguel Delaney and I were tweeting about this and saying that actually, perhaps Ancelotti's record isn't quite as good as it looks to be, because he hasn't won that many domestic titles despite always managing big clubs. And some people were saying, how can you tell Ancelotti how to do his job? You don't know anything about management. And it's true, I know less than 1% of what Carlo Ancelotti does about football management. But I do think that while I can't advise him on how to be better, journalists who examine the evidence and talk to people and ask questions can make judgments about how good or not good someone is at a particular thing without necessarily saying that they have more experts insight or advice to give them.
I think also, Geoff, that we can sometimes ask, and I think this is increasingly important, we can sometimes ask more difficult questions than other people are either able to do or are willing to do. So if we're in a newspaper press conference, quite often, I would say, yields the story of the day as opposed to a broadcast press conference, because I think we ask, by the nature of our jobs, and I don't know what you think about this, as newspapers, it's easier for us to ask difficult questions because they can't, managers, clubs can't really ban a lot of us. Whereas if you get into an adversarial relationship with a manager or a club, it becomes very difficult for you very quickly. And I'm not saying that you've always been very forthright with people like Sir Alex Ferguson, who've occasionally made your life difficult. You've always done your job extremely well, but I still think in broadcasting it's more difficult to be forthright in press conferences than it is in newspapers.
Well, firstly, I always think on that score, in a broadcast, the written press guys, why would you do your best work when it's going to be broadcast?
Yeah.
You hold it back for when it's just the written press. That makes absolute sense.
Although, without getting into minutiae, sometimes there is no just written press anymore. I mean, that's one of the things.
Rare,
that's one of the things that's changing. But I also think it's important that we continue to ask those questions. This is starting to sound slightly precious, but it's important that we keep asking those difficult questions, because I think there is increasingly a move towards content, if you want to call it that, comes from the clubs. That comes from the clubs and is driven by the clubs. And I understand why they're doing that, and that's a commercial decision by them. But obviously that stuff that comes from the clubs suits them, and I think it's important. You know, part of the thing of journalism is asking difficult questions and questions that people don't want to hear and don't want to answer. And I think one of the dangers in terms of the content that people read at the moment is that a lot of it is sanitised.
Well, the juxtaposition that you guys have, and we do as well to a degree, is you need to build relationships with clubs, with managers, with players, but at the same point, you have to ask them questions that they don't want to be asked, and often they certainly don't want to answer.
Well, certainly. I mean, every football club now has got a PR executive or communications executive, and if they hear a question that they don't particularly like or they don't feel that the manager should answer, very often they will jump into the mix a little bit. I mean, I don't envy your job, for example, because I've seen managers go cold when the cameras are turned on, and then as soon as the cameras are switched off, they relax a little bit. And
that's just me.
And that's sometimes when you actually get the best comments is when the managers are relaxed and they're more forthcoming.
I think what you're saying as well, Ollie, brings me on to an interesting point about the PR and the agenda of clubs. Slight tangent, but did you see the story earlier this week regarding Claire Balding? She did an interview. There was a hoo-ha about it. There was copy control and PR puff was inserted. How often are you guys finding that's creeping into your game?
Well, I think that will have struck a chord with all of us, actually, because I think we'd certainly all be aware of that and would all have come across requests like that. I mean, I can't actually remember the last time it happened to me, and maybe that's because instinctively I try and steer away from that.
Away from it.
Yeah, and away from situations where I know that's going to be asked. I mean, I tend not to do a lot of the sort of days where a player is lined up to do interview after interview, and sometimes that's when those kind of things happen. I mean, I have to say, in fairness to a lot of clubs, I did an interview with John Stones at Man City a couple of weeks ago. There was no request for copy approval at all. I went up to see Andrew Robertson at Liverpool, no request for copy approval. Those two clubs, in my experience, are both very good clubs when it comes to putting players forward for interview. But I have had requests in the past for it. I don't know what the experience of the other guys is.
I thought that the Claire Balding story was a particularly egregious example where Balding or Balding's people had sent back the interview with big sections rewritten and her own words inserted in. And to any journalist, that's obviously a huge red flag.
I've never had that. I mean, no. I must admit, I've never had that. That it did look like as Jack says, a particularly bad example.
But I think there are a lot of grey areas short of that, which are increasingly common, often right down to, you know, maybe not formal copy approval, but just saying, I will send this to you, and if you don't like anything, you can give me a call, which is, you know, not quite as bad as having sections rewritten, but it's clearly
I think that's fair enough, though. But,
yeah.
I mean, first of all, we should make it clear that Claire Balding and the editor said it was agreed beforehand that they would have control. So nobody's bent the rules here, if you like. They haven't changed the rules afterwards. But if somebody says, you look, OK, do you mind if I have a look back at it afterwards? It happens to us as well, you know, in sat-down interviews as well. Have a look back just in case, because sometimes over the course of half an hour or so when you're talking to somebody, they might say something in a fashion how it shouldn't have sounded. And we can't expect everybody to be on point the whole time.
Sometimes it's very difficult because if you're offered an interview, for example, Gareth Bale, I went over to Spain to interview Gareth Bale and his advisors asked for copy approval. Steven Gerrard, the same. If you're offered an interview with people like that, then you're going to snap their hands off. And if it comes down to not so much copy approval, but like Jack says, where they can just have a read over to make sure there are no shocks in there, then 9 times out of 10, you're going to do that. I mean, I was quite jealous of the Spanish media this week with the interview with Gerard Piqué, where he came out and said, look, you know, nothing's off limits. I will speak about the situation in with the Catalan election and or the referendum. And he was, you know, I think he was out there for about an hour answering every question that was there. You would not get that in England.
Why don't we get that here? Why?
I think we don't trust our players to talk interestingly about interesting topics. Like, I remember Brexit happened during the Euros last summer.
Yes.
And even though England and Wales and Northern Ireland were there, unfortunately, the players who spoke about it most interestingly and articulately, from memory, were Cesc Fabregas and Giorgio Chiellini. And I think that's not because our players are not capable or not engaged in these issues. I think it's because lots of the people who work around the players, and this isn't just to do with the FA, this is to do with clubs,
sponsors,
and
agents, clubs.
They get scared. They don't trust the players to speak their opinion, and I think that's a bit of a betrayal of them.
A great example is that I won't name the player, but I went to interview an England international, and I rang the agent up just to kind of get a feel for, just to try and get something different out of the player than the usual run-of-the-mill interview. And the agent gave me a little kind of idea, planted a little seed, said, look, he'd be quite happy to talk about that. When I asked the question during the interview, the PR man stepped in and said, you can't go there, you can't ask that kind of question. And that just shows you that what an agent wants out there is sometimes different. A PR man can kind of see a red flag from a mile away, and he stepped in, and I tried to argue the point, but
I think
it was impossible.
I think it's a very big subject because, I mean, I think so. For instance, if you see German players, you will have seen this absolutely as much as us, probably more than us. If you see German players on a stage, say on a dais in a press conference, almost without exception, they're much more confident in a social situation, in a public situation, than English players would be. And I don't know why that is. Maybe some of the blame is on us.
As you're saying that, I'm thinking if there are any players at home watching this right now, they'll be saying, because you lot hammer us all the time. And I include myself in that.
Yeah.
So why should I?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. But then, and undoubtedly, that is part of the equation. But I think it's deeper than that. And I think it comes down to maybe the education system in this country, the education system amongst that they have at clubs, the way players are prepared. But I think absolutely the media plays its part too. And one of the things we've been talking about with England is the fear. This week is the fear that exists when players go out to play for England, because they know that mistakes get absolutely hammered. I
think one of the last times I remember an England player offering an opinion on something was when Jack Wilshere said that Adnan Januzaj shouldn't play for England. You can agree or disagree with him, but it led to a week of fairly negative headlines, I think. And I imagine that will have coloured how Wilshere and the rest of the England team think about offering those kind of opinions down the line.
OK, well, it brings us nicely to our next subject, which is, of course, England. Plenty of negativity, even though they've qualified for the World Cup. We'll be talking England after the break. Welcome back to Sunday Supplement. It's time to talk England. They've qualified for the World Cup and been greeted with absolute apathy at best. Chaps, why is this the case?
Well, I mean, we were, if you're at the game on last week, then we have to be honest about it. It wasn't a great game and it wasn't a great performance. So I suppose that it wasn't a great way to qualify. But nevertheless, if you look back over history, I mean, we've had periods of 12 years, say, between 1970 and 1982, when we didn't play in a World Cup final. So it's, I was looking back at some things last week, say Euro 2000, we struggled to finish second in our group and squeeze through in playoffs. So, I mean, for us to finish top of the group comfortably and qualify with a game in hand is quite an achievement. And it's.
But it doesn't feel like that, does it?
I mean, going back to what Ollie said there about when we didn't qualify for World Cups, that was in the days when actually qualifying was an achievement. England were knocked out by Poland in '74, and Poland went on to finish third. They were knocked out by Italy, I think it was, for the '78 World Cup. Great Italian team that was sort of being formed and would win the World Cup 4 years later. I don't think it's that much of an achievement now to finish top of a qualifying group.
I don't know how you can say that. He's got the job. Your job is to qualify. He's qualified. Surely that's an achievement.
You can only beat the teams that are put in front of you. But, for example, you look at the group that Northern Ireland look like they're about to get out of. That's a group that includes the Czech Republic. Germany have obviously won it, but the Czech Republic and Norway. Now, that's a fantastic achievement. It just doesn't feel like it's a huge achievement for us to qualify from that group.
I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but have we got a problem now? Have we got to be careful? Where it's the crowd's down again at Wembley. For entertainment, the fans are chucking paper planes, and it's all gone a bit dull.
Yeah, there's clearly been a change, I think, probably in the last 10 years between how the public relates to the national team. You know, I think that, I mean, you don't even have to look back that far, but I'd say between maybe Euro 96 and the 2006 World Cup, there was this kind of national mania whenever England had a big game, especially in a tournament. And that just isn't the case now. Like, I'm sure if you went into a pub on Thursday, I mean, I was at Wembley, but if you went into most pubs across the country on Thursday evening, England game would have been on in the background, but people wouldn't exactly have been glued to it. So clearly something's changed. I think that is the main reason for why, obviously, what is a big achievement, getting to a World Cup, because it only happens every 4 years, that feels kind of dampened somehow.
I mean, I think there are lots of contributory factors to this. Now, you wrote a really interesting piece today, Ollie, straight after which almost illustrates where we're at. So they've just qualified. Now, Gareth Southgate, he hasn't pretended that we are Spain.
No.
By any stretch of the imagination. He's not trying to fool anybody. But straight after the game, you spoke to him and you said, you know, why do England players find the shirt so heavy? Why do they not feel comfortable in it? And that's when they've just qualified.
Yeah.
And nobody, I don't think anybody would disagree with the question you asked.
No, well, I mean...
Strange, isn't it?
Well, it is strange. I mean, I think, just to go back to what's changed, I mean, I think what Simon says is true in some ways. If you look at the group that we're in now, I mean, Slovakia, Lithuania, Slovenia...
And Scotland.
But three of those nations didn't exist as footballing nations, as Jack is saying, I don't know, 20 years ago, certainly. And so a lot more games are not meaningless, but have no tension attached to them, I think. And so I think that at a time when club football is massively on the rise, the disparity between the kind of quality of those games and club football is exaggerated, I think. I mean, going back to the fear, I mean, I think that is something that exists and has existed for quite a long time. I mean, I was mentioning to you in the break, I'm doing a book with Kieran Dyer at the moment, and he was talking about being on the bench for an England game and sitting next to a player who said, God, I hope I don't get on. I hope they don't bring me on, because the players were getting some stick. And time again, you'll speak to former England players I think Craig Bellamy, who we talked about before, said he was aware in his playing days of England players going off to join up with England and dreading it. And I think somehow that... I don't know if that culture exists particularly now, but I think that Gareth Southgate is, I have to say, a terrific manager to be able to try and deal with that, because he's been through it himself and he's an intelligent, smart guy, and I think that is one of his main attributes as an England manager, is that I hope he's going to be able to help players through that, because I think if you look at some of the criticism that, say, Raheem Sterling has had, I don't think a lot of it's fair. I think a lot of it's really unfair. And I'm not sure, I haven't spoken to Raheem Sterling about it or any of the people around him. I don't know whether he enjoys joining up with England or not, but I suspect that he knows that he's going to get a lot more stick with England than he does with Man City.
Well, it goes back to what we were talking about in the first part, that the role that the media plays in playing for England, because I don't think we can underestimate it.
It's not just the media, Geoff. It's not just the media. And you can argue that whoever generates it, but you take a look at social media, which is not take a look at the grief. I mean, I made a point in my column today. I had a look at what was trending on Twitter after the England game. There were quite a few England players trending. Most of them were getting absolutely slaughtered. They were trending because they were getting slaughtered. Marcus Rashford was the only one who was trending because he was getting praise.
Kane
wasn't trending, I don't think. But the ones who were getting the most comment were the ones who were getting slaughtered.
I don't think England is unique in having a media that can be critical of the national team either.
No.
I mean, you look at Germany, Brazil, Italy. you know, huge focus on the national team there. Yet those nations have players who seem to be able to deal with it. I just wonder whether football, in a way, has become more tribal over the last 20 years, and fans seem to struggle, in particular, to get behind players who play for rival clubs.
I think that's exactly it. I think that social media is a huge part of this story, because ultimately social media has made us more partisan. It's made us more tribal. It's created this kind of sort of hyper-partisan Premier League reality where people identify with their team 24/7. Like, every time you click on something or like something, you are identifying as a fan of Manchester United or Chelsea or whoever. And that means there isn't really the space anymore to also be an England fan. And I think that the international football has basically been swallowed by what the kind of day-to-day environment of being a club fan now entails.
Ollie mentioned Raheem Sterling. I saw Raheem Sterling play many times away from home last season. He was booed all around the country. You know, songs about letting your country down. Now, how on earth can Raheem Sterling feel relaxed wearing an England shirt when he knows that if he doesn't have a great game, then he's not just going to be hounded at Wembley, he's going to be hounded right the way around every Premier League ground. So I think, yes, there is a huge media focus on the England national team, but I think a lot of the pressure actually comes from supporters.
Remember back in Euro '96, I think it was before the Germany semi-final, England fans at Wembley were singing "You'll Never Walk Alone." That's now completely unimaginable. That at an England crowd, people would sing the songs of one of the big teams.
I think Ollie's spot on. Gareth has got a huge job on his hands, not just with the playing style, because ultimately it's results that dictate the mood, but turning this around. You've got to fear. Well, is that too strong a word? Is it too strong a word to say, do you fear for the future of the England national team?
No, I think it possibly... I mean, I think... I fear for it insofar as I don't think we've got the quality to go too far at the Russia World Cup. But I think part of the problem with that is when Gareth Southgate is realistic about that, you can feel people bristling and saying, you know, even at his post-match press conference after we qualified, you know, he was saying, look, we're not. If you think we're going to be Spain in eight months' time, we're not. But people are saying, so what? Do you not think that we can win the World Cup then? And at which point even I can see headlines come in saying,
damned if you do,
defeatist Southgate, you know, we can't win it, sort of thing. And you think he's just trying to be realistic. And at the moment, we haven't got the quality to, I don't think, to win the World Cup or to challenge properly for it. But I think we have got the nucleus of a very good side. And it's too early.
A young side as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Developing as well.
We just have to try and be a bit realistic about it. It's probably not going to happen for us in 2018, but we've got some very good players, young players. Maybe if we encourage them rather than... You know, we talk about Sterling. I don't know Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. I must admit, I've found some of the criticism of him, again, both from media and from public, unacceptable, to be honest. He's one of our best players, and he is ridiculed for, I'm not quite sure what, because he's having a dip of form. And I just, again, why do we suddenly get on our high horses about they don't want to wear the shirt? Well, maybe they're a little bit nervous about the reception they're going to get.
They are people at the end of the day as well. Help me with this one then. Right, the game tonight is effectively a dead rubber.
Yeah.
OK? Russian roulette. Yeah. Gambling by playing three at the back. Well, they've qualified. Is it now not the time to experiment and try different things?
Well, look, I mean, I haven't...
That headline screams gambling, Russian roulette.
Well, yeah, I suppose it's a nod to the fact that we've qualified for Russia. I haven't read that story, but I mean, I think it's absolutely right that Southgate should
so do I.
Experiment, whatever you want to call it. It's not really a gamble, is it? Because it's a dead rubber. But I mean, moving on to a slightly different subject, the fact that one of the things I think that England fans and media that we're struggling with is the presence of Eric Dyer and Jordan Henderson in a rather stultifying central midfield. And I think if three at the back, if three at the back can unlock something and help us to move away from that, then I think that you just look at our personnel, and I wonder if three at the back might be the way to go.
Another thing I'd like your opinion on, and I'm trying not to sound like a broken record, but this week there's been quite a few headlines generated about the WAGs, whether they can stay at the hotel or not. Is this actually a story? And secondly, All Blacks, one of the best teams in the world, they have an open hotel, open access for journalists all the time. Could that work with England at the World Cup?
Well, I think, for example, the reason why the WAG question is repeatedly asked is because of the experience of the World Cup in Germany in 2006, where having the families and celebrity wives so close to the team hotel became a sideshow. And I actually think on that occasion it did kind of detract from England's World Cup campaign.
Really? Or is that in our minds?
No, I think it did become so much of a side issue for players that they were. Listen, I'm not saying that it was on their minds 24 hours a day, but I just think it was a distraction that they didn't really need. Now, I don't think we should have any problem with players' wives going over to the World Cup in Russia, because I don't think there will be that kind of spotlight on celebrity wives.
Do you think we're in a cycle where we go from Baden-Baden, which is too open, to South Africa, which is maybe too remote, and then we have to go back the other way and
all
go
reactionary.
too open and then too remote again. I think this seems to me like one of those things where there is no right answer. Gareth Southgate said the other day that base camps don't win you World Cups, but ultimately they're an incredibly convenient explanatory tool for when England failed. Say, the problem was that the base camp was either too remote or too open.
From my experience, I think some players would welcome the presence of journalists in there, because it does two things. When you bump into somebody in the lift at breakfast, if you've absolutely slaughtered them the night before, you think twice about it, don't you? When you can, that's the difference between press conference and what we do as well.
I 100% agree with you about this. Accountability is what you talk about to an extent, and a lot of us in the modern world, we wouldn't see players from day to day. And so, as you say, if there's no comeback. Nobody's gonna grab you and say, "Hang on, why did you write that about me? That's not fair." And I think actually, 10 years or so ago or more, I mean, Thierry Henry, I think, certainly not just with me, but rang me a couple of times to tell me off about various stories, and that was brilliant because at least you have some dialogue with somebody, and maybe what he said was right, but it makes you think about it a bit more. But at the moment, you're right, there's no accountability. And I mean, at one point, I'm not sure if Gary has reconsidered this, but I know that Gary Neville at one point was very much a proponent of having media staying in the same hotel as the players, partly for that reason. I'm not sure how it would work in practice, but I think it would be a good idea. Look, it's difficult because you mentioned the All Blacks. I'm not sure that picture you paint is entirely accurate. I mean, I was on the Lions tour, and sure, we went to the All Blacks hotel for press conferences, but I don't. And the All Blacks, some of the players will be hanging around in cafes and things. I think where we do have it,
you don't get that with England.
No, you don't. But I mean, I wouldn't say you could just wander in and talk to players when you want. But
no.
but you don't get that with England, and I do think that we sometimes, again, in terms of players having the confidence to make decisions for themselves, they're not allowed. They're not allowed to. It's like if you go near a player, there has to be a kind of exclusion zone around them because they're not trusted to speak to journalists and. It's, I think it's a situation that certainly could be improved.
I think that would help the relationship, certainly help the relationship between players and journalists, but I think it would help players during a tournament as well. I remember going to the Manchester United team hotel during a pre-season tour of Kuala Lumpur, and the first team squad had gone out to play golf, and at the time Wayne Rooney wasn't a golfer. He was climbing the walls. He was, he was so bored. He was like a caged animal, sort of walking around the hotel. He couldn't go out because he would be mobbed by fans. And I think if you had that kind of a little bit more of an open door policy, then and you could go and chat to players, not particularly for something that's going to go into a report, but just to kind of build that relationship.
Jack, do you think as well that could potentially alleviate some of the pressure, which is we talked about earlier, is on the England players, and also stop that siege mentality that they have? Or is that something that some managers foster deliberately?
Ideally, it would, yeah. I mean, I think we do need trust ultimately is a two-way relationship, and that clearly has to be improved, I think, between the journalists and the England players in going forward. What the FA is saying at the moment is that they do want a more open and transparent environment between media and players at the World Cup next summer, which is a very admirable goal, but it's also quite an easy thing to say in October. And it'd be interesting to see when we're all in Russia, when there's an issue or there's a problem, if then the England players will be allowed to speak freely and openly about whatever this problem or issue or concern is, or whether it will be as kind of micromanaged as it has been in the past.
Well, they're terrified. The players are absolutely terrified. Anything they say will get magnified and scream a headline. That's the problem.
But that's part. Yeah, but these things are almost self-fulfilling prophecies, and so you're sort of everybody's kept apart. There's this sort of sanitised thing. So then whenever anybody says anything, it's so rare that it tends to get magnified. I think if we could just all relax a little bit, then I think Jack's absolutely right. It's about trust, and we as an industry, we have not always earned that trust. But I think there has to be some point at which you say, I think the critical thing is does it matter for the team? Does it matter to what? That's all the public care about. We're not talking about, the public don't care whether we speak to players or whether it's nice for us to speak to players. I think, does it affect the team? And I've always believed that shielding the players from everything too much and not allowing them any responsibility in their personal lives, which I think happens a lot in this country, is a bad thing, because I think it stops it hampers their decision making on the pitch during matches. And so I think anything that gives them more responsibility as players is a good thing.
Well, I've made a decision now, because I'm independent. We've got to go to a break, but after, so you can probably tell the running order's gone right out the window. So we'll be talking Qatar, we're talking Russia, home nations football, and I'm going to find out if these cakes are real. So we'll see you after the break. Welcome back to Sunday Supplement. This week we're joined by Oliver Holt, Simon Mullock and Jack Pitt-Brooke. Now, this week there was a report regarding Qatar, and not for the first time, it's being suggested that possibly the tournament might not take place. Is this surprising? Is this worrying? Or is this predictable?
I think we've learned to live with these stories ever since Qatar won the World Cup vote, really. What has made it obviously more difficult is a political situation in the Middle East and the blockade from countries that surround Qatar getting raw materials to build the infrastructure for the tournament. I mean, we're still more than 5 years away from them actually staging the thing, so I think it's maybe a little bit too early to say that the tournament's not going to go there. And I've got to say, FIFA don't seem overly concerned at the moment. I think that's maybe the time to kind of really look at it if FIFA start getting involved and start worrying about whether they can get things right for the tournament.
I mean, you have to say there is so much money invested in this happening that, the biggest obstacle to this happening was winning the vote in the first place. Having won the vote, it is hard to conceive of anything practical or moral that could get in the way of the tournament going forward.
Really?
I think so, yeah. I mean,
anything moral?
Well, clearly, I mean, if you have a moral issue with it, it shouldn't have happened in the first place, that they shouldn't have won the vote. But they have won the vote. I mean, my colleague Jonathan Liew wrote a brilliant piece about Qatar in The Independent earlier this week, or last week. And he said, if it was going to be taken away, it would have been in the last 7 years, not in the next 5 years, as in between now and 2022. And it's difficult to disagree with that. I don't see how. I'd be so surprised if anything could stop it.
I think 150 billion worth of investment has already been committed to the project, and that's an awful lot of influence for...
Playing devil's advocate, though, if things come to light, either how they won the tournament, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, or practices happening now, I wouldn't say it's an absolute certainty.
Well, I don't see what more could come to light. I mean, there was in Jonathan's piece, he refers to a Human Rights Watch report which came out last week, which is about deaths, the lack of regulation, the covers-up of deaths, the horrible situation for the 2.3 million migrant workers working on this World Cup. We already know this. Now, it's hard to... I mean, what more could happen that could change the dial?
I totally agree. We already know about. I mean, that's the reason for the blockade. They're
accusing them of supporting terrorism.
Exactly, and to a massive degree. So what more do you want? Now, I have to say, I think these stories about them losing it have been going on since they were awarded it. I think it's just wishful thinking because we still can't quite believe that it's happening, but it is happening. And as Jack says, the amount of money that's been invested. Can you imagine if FIFA tried to take it away from them in terms of legal issues that they'd have? I mean, FIFA would be looking at being bankrupted, I would have thought, by legal challenges by Qatar. I mean, I don't... not in a million years do I think they should have been awarded it in the first place.
No.
But nor do I think it's going to be taken away now, unfortunately.
In fact, should there not be a kind of spirit of, look, a World Cup has never happened in the Middle East. They maybe shouldn't have had it in the first place because to win it and then say, oh, by the way, it's going to be in the winter is not right. But now it is there. Everyone should really get behind it as a chance to take the show to that part of the world.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure about that. I mean, yeah, OK, it's going to that part of the world, but is it something that we ought to celebrate or endure? I mean, as Jack said, Jonathan Liu's piece is the latest and a very good example of pieces that have exposed some of the issues about labour, in particular in Qatar, and what's happening there. So I'm sorry, but I don't think it's anything to celebrate particularly. I agree with you that it's good when the game goes to other parts of the world, and actually, although there are issues with the staging of it in Russia, I think that I'm looking forward to...
Are they any greater, the concerns for Qatar, that they are for Russia, when you think of all the issues in Russia?
Well, one of the big elements of a World Cup bid is the legacy that's going to be left behind, and for the life of me, I just can't see what kind of legacy is going to be left behind in Qatar. I just don't see how it's going to benefit the game in that country over a longer term.
So on that basis, are we excited about the World Cup in Russia?
Yeah, but this thing about is Russia any worse than Qatar? You could say, well, yeah, but is it? Let's not pretend that America is it. You know,
no.
OK, so if it goes to America, would we really want to go to America because of some of the issues that are happening in American society at the moment? I mean, you can go on and on and on with this. I just think that
you can pick fault with all of it.
Yeah, I just think that Qatar is a particularly bad example of a wrong decision, but that's a personal opinion.
No one's going to defend Russia on human rights grounds, but nevertheless, Qatar is worse than Russia. I think that seems fairly clear.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, people have very real reservations about the Russian World Cup, again, how they got it. But even then, you know, Russia is at the least a kind of identifiable football nation. It's very, you know, it's got fantastic infrastructure. It's got it's got a great tradition of football clubs, international football, and football fans.
And it's also starting to look
I'm not sure I put the football fans on that list.
It's also starting to look as though South Africa 2010 was, you know, the process was not super clean. It's starting to look as though Brazil 2014, you know, I mean, there are... But I think we just have to come to the conclusion that the awards of the World Cup is not a particularly spotless process.
Even going back to 1978, which was my favourite World Cup, the Argentina World Cup was the one that kind of really captured my imagination when I was a kid. And then years later, you read all the horror stories, the political situation in the country, the way that the tournament was fixed so that the host nation got through to the final. So even going back to then, this has always happened in football. It's always been a problem in terms of who gets the World Cup.
Right, enough doom and gloom. Come on, Sunday morning, let's try and get a bit upbeat. Let's start with Scotland. Gordon Strachan, how he's turned this around. Do you remember when they drew with Canada and the amount of times we've seen Gordon Strachan saying, I want to carry on? Look at them now, tonight, on the cusp, qualified. Fantastic.
It is fantastic, and I think he's done an absolutely terrific job. And I mean, I think I've been moaning about England, you know, the lack of meaningless games in England, or the amount of meaningless games in England's group. The game against Scotland up there was a terrific occasion. You know, terrific occasion, fantastic fight back by Scotland, who probably should have won in the end. But I mean, and I think that helped. Definitely that result helped Strachan turn things around. And I think he's done a terrific job because, as you said, it's not long ago when he was really under a lot of pressure. And I think he's proved what a good manager he is up there.
And also, if you look what he's working with, and this is absolutely meant with no disrespect, but do you remember the old days? Every First Division or Premier League team had, you know, the Scottish players. They were household names. This isn't even necessarily the case in Scotland now with some of these players.
I think if you... Going back to the problem with England...
we can't always just harp on about England.
No, but teams like Scotland, for example, they are better than the sum of their parts. Same with Northern Ireland. To a certain extent, I know Wales have got Gareth Bale, but to a certain extent, as they proved the other night, without Gareth Bale, they're the same. With England, it never feels like that.
Well, they foster that camaraderie, don't they? Is it because they are underdogs? But, I mean, Wales ranked higher than England.
Yeah. How
come they have that indomitable spirit and England don't?
I wonder if it's to do with expectations. I think that the pressure of expectation that we have with the national team, and this is kind of connected to what we were talking about earlier on, seems to have a negative effect on the team ethic or the team atmosphere. Whereas with Wales and the Republic of Ireland, Scotland and Northern Ireland to varying degrees, because they are seen as the underdog, they can talk about how, you know, they're up against it. And do you remember when Gareth Bale during the Euros was talking about how because Wales are a smaller nation, they've got more pride and passion than England? And he was hammered for saying it, but you can see what he was getting at. And I think that's a bond that unites all of those national teams.
Who was he hammered by?
English players, I think. They didn't go down very well with, if I remember rightly. Mm-hmm. Some people in the English media weren't that impressed with what Bale said. I mean, you know, you can agree with him or not, but you see where he's coming from.
But Wales play Belgium in the quarter-final of the Euros, and Chris Coleman warns the players beforehand, look, you can't worry about picking up a second booking that will rule you out the semi-final. Aaron Ramsey and Ben Davies both get booked and miss the game. And the way it was portrayed was they took one for the team. They knew that they were going to miss the semi-final if they got booked, but that didn't stop them doing what they had to do to get Wales through. Now, I'm sorry to say this, but do you see any England players that would kind of put themselves on the line like that?
I'm not sure how you can say that. I'm not sure how you would question that.
Yeah, I'm not.
I don't think you can.
No, maybe not. Maybe being a little bit unfair. But that, for me, kind of illustrated the spirit that a team like Wales have got.
I mean, if they get there, we hope they do, is arguably Northern Ireland the most impressive performance?
Well, I suppose it is insofar as they've got the smallest, catchment area, and I think nobody can argue with the job that Michael O'Neill has done.
Fantastic.
I mean, you know, I spent a little bit of time around their camp at the Euros, and I've spoken to him a few times, and he's a very impressive, incredibly impressive guy, and the job that he's done is, you know, the fact that they've kicked on since the Euros and not just faded away. I mean, I think they've had a terrific qualifying, really terrific
qualifying. What's he got? When you say, I don't know him at all. What's he got? What's he like?
He's quite humble. He's very bright. He's spent a bit of time outside of football. I think he's got a bit of perspective. Players seem to like him. He's got authority too. I mean, I don't think it was all sweetness and light inside the Northern Ireland camp at the Euros, and I think, you know, he's got the ability, like great managers have, to bring maverick players into the fold as well. So I think he's, you know, he and most of all, I suppose, he's got the absolute maximum out of a bunch of players, which again, you know, possibly has not been the case. You know, with England teams in the past.
I mean, the possibility, if you said to Northern Ireland fans, we can qualify here, that'd have snatched your hand off, wouldn't they?
Particularly with the group that they've been drawn in.
Exactly.
You know, Germany, Czech Republic, Norway. When that draw was made, I don't think there was anybody outside Northern Ireland who gave them much of a chance to qualify, yet they're well clear in second. It's not as if they're kind of sneaking over the line. They're well clear.
inevitably, it leads us to the big one. Wales against the Republic. It's winner takes all, isn't it?
Yeah, I think...
It's just, it's fantastic. In many ways, it's great, but it's also a great shame.
On paper, you'd say that Wales are probably favourites. I mean, even without Gareth Bale, you know, Joe Allen and Aaron Ramsey, they've got better midfielders ultimately than Ireland do. That said, the evidence of Ireland over the last few years, they do save their best performances for the biggest occasions. You know, I think both the qualifiers against Germany in the last cycle, obviously that famous game against Italy in Lille. And if they can get to that level on Monday night they did in those big games, they might even be able to turn Wales over.
You talk about also the job that Strachan's done with Scotland, and you were saying about the sort of lack of recognition of some of the, you know, when you look at the Scotland team. I mean, again, if you look at the Ireland team, there are not a lot of household names in that team anymore. So I think it's become fashionable recently to be a little bit negative, I think, about Martin O'Neill, possibly even in...
I don't know why that is.
Possibly even in Ireland. Well, no, I don't know either, because I've always been a big fan of his. But I mean, I think again, the job that he's done to get them into this position is a fantastic job. I think that's overlooked, possibly because of some of the successes they've had in the past. But I think his job is as good as anybody's.
But then, like you say, they've got, you know, this is probably the least talented Irish squad in a generation. They don't have any players who are really established in the top half of the Premier League, with the exception of the guys who play for Burnley.
Yeah.
And so for them to be able to, if they were to reach another tournament, that would be a fantastic achievement from O'Neill.
Well, the other thing for Wales as well, they proved it the other night, no Bale, no problem.
Yeah.
And in Lawrence, he's the new Ben Woodburn, even though he's older than him.
Well, he is, and I think that Wales have got into a situation now where they, I guess it's a positivity thing in some ways, where they've developed a happy knack of finding, they've almost got a production line. So they've got Woodburn, they've got Lawrence now, you know, and I mean, Jack mentioned Aaron Ramsey before. We talk about no Gareth Bale, and quite rightly, that's a huge miss for them. But I think it's interesting to see the way that Ramsey always seems to step up for Wales. I mean, I didn't see the Moldova game, but I believe that he had a terrific game. And I mean, he is, you know, he is an absolute quality. He's a quality player, and they have got, again, it's easy to forget, they have got some very good players. I mean, we're talking about Ireland and Scotland maybe not having the same name recognition, but Wales, actually, you look down their side, you know, Joe Allen, Ashley Williams,
Ben Davis.
I mean, they've got a very good side. They've got some very good players in that side.
They've also got about 7 or 8 players with 50 caps or more. And
Yes.
I think that experience has been absolutely vital for Chris Coleman.
It's a good blend.
I wouldn't underestimate either the role that the Welsh fans play.
Well,
I went to when they played Belgium in a qualifier, and the atmosphere was absolutely electric in Cardiff.
I would have to admit that sometimes here on Sky we are accused of overhyping things, but you can't overhype this game Monday. Massive game. Of course, you can see it live on Sky on Monday night. But next, for those of you starved of Premier League action, we're going to be talking Klopp and Koeman. Good to have your company on Sunday Supplement. Now it's time to go back once again to the Premier League, which is a relief to many people because they just get bored in International Week. Same for you boys?
Well,
That's a yes then.
Yeah.
no, it's not a yes, but I think that like everybody else, you notice the difference in quality, I suppose. And you know, we talked a lot in the first segment about the atmosphere at Wembley against Slovenia, and it was poor. It was quiet. It was a contrast to the atmosphere you get for a big Premier League game. So I suppose the brutal answer is yes. I do miss the Premier League, and I do miss the Premier League weekends. And, you know, the international break, unfortunately, has become a sort of byword for something that we have to endure, not something to enjoy.
Even when Tottenham play at Wembley, like, the atmosphere isn't great, but when you get off the tube at Wembley Park, it's full of people in Tottenham shirts, singing Tottenham songs, and it's quite noisy and it's quite fun to be around. Whereas England at Wembley is so sedate. It's lots of families, which is good. It's lots and lots of you know, the sort of post office pub crowd, and it hasn't got that same kind of, you know, vibrancy, unity, noise, whatever that really characterises a proper football crowd.
The post office pub crowd, is that a pub, the post office? But I get what you're saying. I tell you what, though, Jack, is the opposite of what you're describing there, the flat atmosphere, if you like, the perfect fixture? We've got Liverpool against Manchester United this Saturday. Is that the antidote to all of that type of fixture?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone can't wait for this game. It's going to be brilliant. I think that even though when United went to Liverpool last year, they played for a 0-0 and got it, I think they should probably be able to do the same again this year, but with the added fact that I'd back them to nick a goal just because the Liverpool defence is so bad. Like, Liverpool have conceded 12 goals, I think, so far in the Premier League. Only Crystal Palace and West Ham have conceded more. I know that when Burnley went to Anfield the other week and drew 1-1, the Burnley players knew that all they had to do was keep it tight because eventually the Liverpool defence would cough up a few big chances, which is exactly what happened. And so United can, even in this game, United can sit back, defend, keep it tight, like Jose likes to, and they will get some chances. And with Lukaku, you'd probably back them to take them. Well,
it's 2 years today that Jurgen Klopp arrived, 2 years ago, I should say, arrived at Liverpool. What's your assessment of the first couple of years?
I think he's doing a good job, but with caveats. For example, I don't think he's addressed issues or the flaws that everybody saw in Liverpool's defence last season. They look just as vulnerable every time they get attacked, and like Jack says, the chances they cough up are normally big chances. The thing is, it's the weight of history with Liverpool. They've gone so long without winning the Premier League title that the fans, they kind of demand it now. They want it now. The thing is, he's been there 2 years. Has there been progress? Well, I think, yeah, because he's got them back in the Champions League. And I'm one of those believers, by the way, that a Champions League qualification is as good as winning a trophy. I think that was a huge step back in the right direction for Liverpool. But if you look at the job that he did at Borussia Dortmund, for example, it was a 2-year rebuild at that club before they started winning trophies. And he didn't spend an awful lot of money at Dortmund, and he's not spent an awful lot of money in real terms at Liverpool. He's kind of generated his own transfer finance. I think it's one of those. It's not going to be Liverpool are not going to be a Man City or a Man United where they will spend what it takes to be challenging for the title again. I think it's a more sedate kind of progress, but I think that they are going in the right direction.
Personally, I think it's a bit harsh on Klopp, the criticism. I think only once in the previous 7 or 8 seasons they've finished in the top 4, so that's huge progress last season. Now, where they're sat, it's still very early in the season. Yes, it's obvious to anybody they're not as strong defensively as they want to be, but they're in the Champions League. It's still early on, and they've had quite a tough opening schedule as well.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think some of the criticism has been harsh, and I think he's changed the mood there. I think it's not all sweetness and light. They've made some mistakes, as Simon said, in terms of recruitment. I think they haven't fixed some problems, but I think things are. I feel that things are moving forward. They're moving in the right direction, and I also think that you have to be realistic. And Liverpool are not competing with Manchester United, Manchester City, and Chelsea in the transfer market. They're not spending the same amount of money, and usually the amount of money that you spend is reflected in the table. It's a cold, hard fact.
I could hear people screaming Leicester City from somewhere.
Yeah, but Leicester City was a fantastic story, but it was a one-off, and it's fair enough. It's a fair point, but it was a one-off.
By contrast, Jose Mourinho is saying right now, in any other country, you'd be getting, in terms of their start. He's been downplaying Manchester United's start. He said, not here though. Now, do you think he's being wise here? Is this Jose showing all of his guile? Say, look, it's so early. Don't get carried away with the idea that this is just us and City.
I think they've made a great start, United, but they had an easy start. They've had easy fixtures, and I think that's one of the things I'm most looking forward to about this game is to see how Liverpool play, but most of all, actually, to see how Manchester United stand up in a big match against one of the leading contenders. Another club who should be there or thereabouts. And I think I kind of agree with Jack that I think they're better. They're better placed than they were last year, and I'm sure they'll go into the game favourites. I think they've had easier games at the start of this season than the other leading contenders, but still doesn't mean they haven't been impressive.
This is the kind of game that gives United the first real test of the season, and I think it's the kind of game that Mourinho will love, because Liverpool will go out, they'll be foot to the floor like Liverpool always are. They will attack, but again, the problem is he's keeping United out at the other end, and at the moment, Lukaku looks absolutely lethal, and United look lethal as a team going forward. I just hope, with it being one of the games of the season, that there's not a few lingering cobwebs after the international break, which sometimes happens, because I just think for both teams, this is such a huge game, even at this stage of the season. You chaps are around him a lot. You observe Jose a lot. Have you seen a fundamental change in his mood, his demeanour this season?
Well, I haven't done any Manchester United games this season. I think he's probably enjoying the power that he has at Manchester United relative to the situation at Chelsea, where he found himself coming up against, you know, other powerful executives at the club who might have their own ideas about how things are run. Equally, I think that he must know that, yes, last season, in the Premier League at least, was an underachievement, and therefore he is obliged to put a proper Premier League push together this season, which they couldn't do last year.
He seemed, I mean, his demeanour to me seemed very unhappy last season at Manchester United. It was almost the equivalent of the sort of teachers no smiling before Christmas sort of thing. I think he seemed to be wanting to try and, you know, he's very critical of some of his players, which is unusual for the old Mourinho. I hesitate to get into this area because I don't really know what his personal circumstances are, but it's in the public domain that his father was ill. You know, none of us are an island, and I don't know if those things, it would be completely natural if those things impacted him a bit. He certainly seems happier this season, and I think maybe a lot of people have been saying, you know, Guardiola even said last week after the Chelsea-Man City game that this looks like a Mourinho team now, and so he's clearly happier with his team, I think.
I think that's absolutely spot on. I think the one thing that plagued Mourinho last season is that he's a winner. He wants to win everything, and it wasn't his team. I think this year he feels that this is a team with his fingerprint on it, and I think he realises after the investment that United have made, there are no excuses. The one thing that Mourinho has always loved to do, whether he's at Chelsea or Milan or Madrid, is get off to a blistering start, and United have got that. He will see this as a foundation now to really go the distance, and he'll be expecting to win the title. I think his demeanour has been a lot more relaxed this season because he's finally got his team on the pitch. Even this early in the race, would you say the title is going to Manchester?
Not necessarily, because I think Chelsea is still very good. I mean, I know that they were poor against City last Saturday, but that was a few days after a brilliant performance away at Atletico Madrid, which is an incredibly hard place to go. I think Chelsea will probably struggle to compete on multiple fronts, but if they were to go out of Europe early, then I think Conte has shown, you know, he's won 4 league titles in his career already, in quite a brief managerial career. He's an absolute master at getting his team up every week, again and again and again, to win a league title. So I certainly wouldn't rule them out of it yet. I think it's between the two Manchester teams, simply because of that fact. I think that City and United have both got squads that are capable of dealing with the stresses of playing in Europe and the Premier League. I think it'll be between City or United. Ollie, for you, can we say this early? It's going to Manchester?
Well, I can't. I hear what Jack's saying, and I accept that it's slightly dismissive, but I kind of agree with Simon. I think it is going to Manchester, yeah. And I think Jack is also right about the performance. I think against Chelsea's performance possibly being impacted by what they did in midweek against Atletico, but I just thought City were so impressive against Chelsea. I mean, I just thought they're on a different level, and again, Guardiola referenced it after the game. It was reminiscent of the way they played against Manchester United for the first half at Old Trafford last season, which again was an incredibly impressive performance that went slightly awry after that. But it's a question of whether, obviously, the big question mark against City is whether they can keep that, whether they can play like that consistently. If they can, they'll win the title. But I don't see it going beyond Manchester.
OK, final break, and the final part, we're going to be talking Chelsea, who Jack just touched on just now, and also Everton and Ronald Koeman. Welcome back to Sunday Supplement. Referred to this one earlier on today. Conte, even though I can't hold the paper straight, Conte's set to go at the end of the season. This is a recurring theme, isn't it?
Well, I don't think clearly he's had his issues at Chelsea with things that he's found. I think he, again, like Mourinho a bit when he went back there in 2013, he expected to be able to do everything that he wanted to be able to sign the players he wanted. In reality, he hasn't got all the players he wanted. But nevertheless, he's shown his skill as a coach. But I think ultimately no one expects him to do a kind of Ferguson or Wenger there. He's not going to be there in 5 to 10 years' time. He's just an incredibly effective coach working for a few years before going off somewhere else.
That doesn't seem to bother Chelsea, though, does it?
It's the Chelsea model.
That's exactly right. I mean, it doesn't matter who steps into that hot seat, they're always successful, right through the Abramovich era, really.
But is it possible, when those vibes are coming out of a club, could that impact on this season, Ollie, do you think?
Well, possibly, Geoff. I mean, but it's as the boys are saying, it's the modern way. And I mean, I think that history tells you and the examples from other countries tell you that it doesn't necessarily need to impact. I mean, we've moved beyond the years of the great patrician managers almost. I mean, I suppose Wenger's the last of those. But the same applies to the players. The players move on with more frequency as well. So I don't really see that it would affect the players that much.
I did find it curious, the game against Manchester City. He announced that his players were tired, I think before they went to Atletico, play the game, they're tired afterwards, they're tired before the game, and afterwards said they're tired. I think he made them tired. It seems strange to me. He went on about the exertion that was going to happen before it even happened.
Well, he's very political, Conte. He's not averse to getting his excuses in early if he thinks it's going to help him out. But what he said was proven right. Like City did run them off the pitch in the second half.
Yeah, but you can't have helped them by saying that. If you put it in a player's mind that you're tired, does that seem strange to you?
You wonder whether that was a message that was to be heard in the boardroom as much as the dressing room. I think the performance against Atletico compared to the one against City would suggest that Conte is looking more towards the Champions League this season rather than retaining the Premier League. He's done that, he's ticked that box, and I just wonder whether he thinks that if he can win a European Cup with Chelsea, then that would make him one of the greats. OK, we're running out of time, Ollie. I'd like to hear from you. Everton, start of the season, big fanfare, lots of signings. Bit of a wobble.
Yeah, it is a wobble. And, I mean, I don't want to come across like Maria Theresa, sort of Mother Teresa even.
Maria's a lovely lady.
Maria Theresa, yeah, I think there's... my daughter's studying the Habsburg, so there you go. It's in my head. But I think that the pressure on Koeman, or the supposed pressure on Koeman, is unrealistic. I think he's, as you say, he brought a lot of signings in. I thought they were good signings when they were made, and I think they need a bit of time. I still think they were good signings. I think they just need a bit of time to bed in. I think the big problem that he's got is they've lost Lukaku. They've lost a huge presence up front, and they haven't replaced him.
OK, well, our biggest problem is that we're out of time. So I'd like to say thank you very much to you, Ollie, to you, Simon, as well, and you too, Jack. Very much enjoyed your company, gentlemen.